Bedtime story. Get ready because the story is sensational. Careful, this romance is hot, intense, and full of secrets that not even money could bury. Now, the story begins, and you won't be able to stop. Amanda Sterling pressed her manicured fingertips against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath her, like a kingdom she was meant to inherit but never truly possess. At 18, she had everything money could buy: designer clothes that hugged her curves perfectly, a trust fund that could buy small countries, and a future mapped out in board meetings and charity galas. Yet she felt like a beautiful bird, trapped in a cage made of platinum and promises. "Sit down, Amanda. We need to discuss your future." Her father's voice cut through her reverie like a blade wrapped in silk. Richard Sterling commanded rooms the way other men commanded armies, with absolute authority and the unspoken threat of consequences for disobedience. She turned slowly, letting her emerald eyes meet his steel-gray ones. Even at 18, Amanda had learned to master defiance behind a smile that could melt hearts and hide secrets. "What about my future, Daddy?" The word tasted bitter on her tongue, but she delivered it with honey-sweet precision. Richard's lips curved into what passed for a smile in his world of corporate warfare. "The Henderson boy will be joining us for dinner tonight. William's a good match. Harvard-educated, comes from old money, and most importantly, he understands how our world works." Amanda's pulse quickened, but not with excitement. The thought of William Henderson, with his predictable conversation and wandering hands, made her skin crawl. She'd rather kiss a snake than spend another evening pretending to be charmed by his entitled advances. "I'm only 18, Daddy. Don't you think I should focus on college first?" She perched on the edge of his mahogany desk, crossing her long legs in a way that made grown men stumble over their words. But Richard Sterling was immune to such tactics. He'd taught her every one of them. Stanford has an excellent program, and the Henderson family has deep connections there. You'll have the best of both worlds, education and the right social circles. His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Amanda Sterling had never been one to surrender without a fight. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to that sultry register that came naturally when she wanted something. "What if I want to choose my own path? My own companions?" The last word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made her father's jaw tighten. "You'll have plenty of time for frivolous pursuits after you've secured your future. The Sterling name comes with responsibilities. Amanda, you can't just follow your impulses." His pause before impulses made it clear he knew exactly what kind of thoughts occupied his daughter's mind. Amanda stood gracefully, smoothing down her silk dress that cost more than most people's cars. "And if I refuse?" The question was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of rebellion that had been building in her chest for months. Richard's expression shifted, revealing the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire from nothing. "Then you'll learn what life is like without the Sterling fortune. No trust fund, no credit cards, no safety net. Just you and whatever skills you think you possess in the real world." The threat should have terrified her, but instead, Amanda felt a thrill of dangerous excitement. The idea of escaping this golden prison, even into uncertainty, made her heart race in ways that no approved suitor ever could. "I understand, Daddy." She moved closer, pressing a dutiful kiss to his cheek that felt like signing a contract with the devil. "I'll be the perfect daughter tonight." But as she walked toward the door, her hips swaying with natural sensuality, Amanda Sterling was already planning her escape. She'd been a perfect daughter for 18 years, playing by rules written by men who saw her as a beautiful accessory to their ambitions. Tonight, she would smile and charm William Henderson. But tomorrow she would find out what it felt like to live dangerously. The elevator descended toward the lobby, and with each floor, Amanda felt herself transforming. The obedient daughter was just a mask she wore, but underneath lived a woman hungry for passion, adventure, and the kind of love that set souls on fire. She didn't know it yet, but fate was about to introduce her to someone who would show her exactly what she'd been missing behind the golden bars of her privileged prison. As the elevator doors opened, Amanda Sterling stepped into a world where anything was possible, if she was brave enough to reach for it. And for the first time in her life, bravery felt more intoxicating than safety, rebellion more seductive than compliance. The game was about to begin, and she was ready to play for stakes higher than her father's empire, her heart, her freedom, and her chance at a love worth risking everything for. 3 days after the suffocating dinner with William Henderson, Amanda Sterling found herself desperate for air that didn't smell like her father's expectations. She convinced her driver to drop her off at the art district downtown, claiming she needed to pick up a piece for charity auction. It was a lie that tasted sweet on her rebellious tongue. The morning sun painted the brick buildings in shades of gold and amber as Amanda wandered through streets she'd never been allowed to explore. Her designer heels clicked against cracked sidewalks, each step taking her further from her gilded world and closer to something that made her pulse race with anticipation. She stopped outside Martinez Auto Repair, drawn by the sound of classic rock bleeding through open bay doors and the sight of muscle forearms working beneath the hood of a vintage Mustang. The mechanic's back was turned to her, his oil-stained tank top clinging to shoulders that spoke of honest work rather than pampered gym sessions. "Excuse me," Amanda called out, her voice carrying that honeyed tone that usually got her whatever she wanted. "I think I'm lost." The man straightened slowly, and when he turned around, Amanda's breath caught in her throat like a butterfly in a spider's web. Dark hair fell across his forehead in waves that begged for fingers to run through them. His eyes were the color of coffee at midnight, framed by lashes that belonged on a Renaissance painting. A day's worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that could cut glass. And when his lips curved into a questioning smile, Amanda felt her knees go weak. "Lost." His voice was gravelly honey, the kind that made women forget their own names. "Where were you trying to get to, princess?" The nickname should have offended her, but the way he said it, with gentle teasing rather than mockery, made heat pool low in her belly. "I was looking for the Morrison Gallery," she lied smoothly, unable to look away from the way his forearms flexed as he wiped his hands on a rag. "You're about 6 blocks off course." He stepped closer, and Amanda caught the scent of motor oil, leather, and something distinctly masculine that made her head spin. "I'm James, by the way. James Rodriguez." "Amanda." She extended her manicured hand, and when his callous fingers closed around hers, electricity shot up her arm like lightning seeking ground. The contact lasted a heartbeat too long. Their eyes locked a moment that stretched between them like a taut wire. "Amanda," he repeated, her name rolling off his tongue like a prayer or a promise. That's a beautiful name for a beautiful woman who's definitely not from around here. She should have been offended by a presumption, but instead she found herself leaning closer, drawn by a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. "What makes you so sure I don't belong here?" James's eyes traveled slowly down her body, from her perfectly styled hair to her silk blouse that cost more than most people's rent, to her designer jeans that hugged every curve, finally resting on her Italian leather shoes. When his gaze met hers again, there was heat there that made her breath quicken. "Lucky guess," he said with a grin that was pure sin. "Though I have to say, you're a hell of a lot more interesting than the usual lost tourists who wander in here. Maybe I'm more interesting than you think." The words slipped out before she could stop them, loaded with invitation and challenge. Amanda Sterling had never flirted with a man her father hadn't pre-approved, but standing in this garage with grease-stained concrete beneath her feet, she felt more alive than she had in years. "Is that so?" James moved closer still until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And what exactly makes you so interesting, Amanda?" The way he said her name was like a caress, intimate and knowing. She tilted her chin up defiantly, meeting his challenge with fire in her emerald eyes. "I'm full of surprises." "I bet you are." His voice dropped to a whisper that made her skin prickle with awareness. "The question is, are you brave enough to share them with someone like me?" The implication hung between them, dangerous and intoxicating. Amanda knew she should walk away, return to her world of safety and expectations. Instead, she took a step closer, closing the distance until they were breathing the same air. "Someone like you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Someone who works with his hands. Someone who doesn't wear suits to dinner or know which fork to use first. Someone who your daddy would probably have arrested for looking at you the wrong way." His honesty was brutal and beautiful, cutting through her world of pretense like a blade through silk. "My father doesn't get to choose who looks at me," Amanda said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Or how they look at me." James reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a strand of honey gold hair behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her skin for just an instant, but the touch burned like a brand. "Good," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with reverent gentleness. "Because I plan to look at you a lot more than that, if you'll let me." Amanda's world tilted on its axis. Standing in this garage with motor oil staining the air and classic rock providing the soundtrack, she felt more desired, more seen, more alive than she ever had in her father's sterile penthouse. This man, this beautiful, dangerous man, looked at her like she was a woman worth knowing, not just a pretty accessory to someone else's ambitions. "I should go," she whispered, but her body betrayed her words by swaying closer to his magnetic pull. "Should and want are different things," James said, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stripped away every pretense. "What do you want, Amanda?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. What did she want? She wanted to trace the strong line of his shoulders with her fingertips. She wanted to feel those work-rough hands explore every inch of her pampered skin. She wanted to know what it felt like to be kissed by a man who desired her rather than her bank account. "I want," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her own honesty. "Tell me," he urged, his voice rough with need that matched her own. "I want to know what it feels like to be wanted for me, not for what I represent." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. James's eyes darkened with something deeper than desire, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Then stick around," he said simply. "Let me show you." 2 weeks had passed since that electric moment in James's garage, and Amanda Sterling had become a master of deception. She discovered talent she never knew she possessed. The ability to lie with a straight face to her father's security team, to create elaborate alibis for charity events that didn't exist, and to slip away from her gilded prison with the stealth of a cat burglar. Tonight, she stood on the fire escape of an abandoned warehouse, her heart hammering against her ribs as she climbed toward the rooftop where James waited. She'd traded her designer heels for worn sneakers, her silk blouses for fitted jeans that hugged her curves in ways that made James's eyes go dark with hunger. The transformation was intoxicating, becoming someone her father would never recognize. "You made it." James's voice carried across the rooftop as she emerged through the access door, breathless and exhilarated from her escape. He stood silhouetted against the city skyline, a blanket spread beneath the stars and candles flickering in mason jars, creating their own private constellation. "Did you doubt me?" Amanda moved toward him with newfound confidence, her hips swaying with natural sensuality that had nothing to do with finishing school lessons and everything to do with the way this man looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. "Never," he said, reaching for her hands and pulling her close. "You're full of surprises, remember?" The past 2 weeks had been a revelation. James had shown her a world that existed in shadows and stolen moments. Late-night diners where they talked until dawn, hidden corners of the city where street art told stories more honest than anything in her father's penthouse, motorcycle rides that left her clinging to his solid warmth while the wind whipped through her hair like freedom itself. "I brought something," Amanda said, producing a bottle of wine from her bag. Not the $1,000 vintage from her father's collection, but a $20 bottle James had mentioned liking from the corner store near his apartment. "Look at you, adapting to slumming it with the common folk," he teased, but his eyes held admiration that made her pulse race. James never made her feel ashamed of her privilege. Instead, he challenged her to see beyond it, to discover who she was underneath the Sterling name. They settled onto the blanket, the city sprawling beneath them like a sea of lights. Up here, Amanda could almost forget about board meetings and trust funds and arranged marriages. Up here, she was just a woman falling dangerously in love with a man who saw straight through to her soul. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," James said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare arm that left trails of fire in their wake. Amanda leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. "I used to sneak into my father's office when I was little and pretend to be him, making important decisions and commanding respect." She paused, vulnerability creeping into her voice. "I want to be powerful like him, But I wanted to use that power differently. How differently? His voice was soft against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her neck. To help people instead of just accumulating more wealth. To create something meaningful instead of just maintaining an empire. She turned in his arms, meeting his intense gaze. Your turn. Tell me something real. James was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. I used to think love was a luxury I couldn't afford, that someone like me had no business dreaming about someone like you. And now, the question escaped as barely a whisper. Now I think maybe we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. His lips found hers then, soft and seeking. A kiss that tasted like wine and promises, and the kind of forever that existed outside of time. Amanda melted into him. Her hands fisting in his shirt as passion ignited between them like striking a match in gasoline. Every kiss with James was a revelation, stripping away layers of pretense until she was raw and real and more herself than she'd ever been. I love the way you taste, she murmured against his lips, surprising herself with her boldness. 2 weeks ago, she would have blushed at such words, but James had awakened something primal and honest in her that refused to be silenced. Amanda! He groaned her name like a prayer, his hands tangling in her hair as he deepened the kiss. She could feel his restraint in the careful way he touched her, the way he held back even as his body told her exactly how much he wanted her. I trust you, she said, understanding passing between them without need for more words. She'd given him her secrets, her real thoughts, pieces of herself she'd never shared with anyone. Now she wanted to give him everything. James pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to being strangers who happen to meet in a garage. I was never a stranger to you, Amanda said with sudden clarity. From the moment you looked at me, really looked at me, I felt like you already knew who I was underneath all the pretense. God, you're incredible, he whispered. And then his mouth was on hers again, hungry and demanding, all restraint finally abandoned. His hands explored her body with reverent worship, mapping every curve like he was memorizing her for a lifetime. Amanda had never felt anything like this. This complete surrender control, this intoxicating blend of vulnerability and power. With James, she wasn't the sterling heiress or the perfect daughter or the society princess. She was just Amanda, a woman drowning in sensation and love, and a desperate need to be closer to this man who'd turned her carefully ordered world upside down. I'm falling in love with you, she confessed against his neck, the words escaping before fear could stop them. James went completely still beneath her, and for a terrifying moment, Amanda thought she'd ruined everything. Then his hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. I'm already gone, he said simply. Have been since the moment you walked into my garage pretending to be lost. I wasn't pretending, Amanda realized with sudden clarity. I was lost. I just didn't know what I was looking for until I found you. They made love under the stars at night, their bodies moving together with desperate passion and tender reverence, creating their own universe where social boundaries and family expectations ceased to exist. Amanda discovered what it meant to be truly desired, truly cherished, truly seen, while James learned that love could indeed be a luxury he deserved. As dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amanda lay in James's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat like her new favorite song. She knew this summer of stolen moments couldn't last forever, but for now, wrapped his love in her own newfound courage, she felt infinite. What are you thinking about? James asked, his fingers combing through her tousled hair. Forever, she admitted, and how much I want with you. His arms tightened around her, as if he could hold back the dawn and the reality that waited beyond their secret sanctuary. Then we'll find a way to make forever happen, he promised, no matter what it takes. But even as they held each other in the growing light, neither could see the storm gathering on their horizon, the forces that would soon test whether their love was strong enough to survive in the harsh light of day. Amanda's world shattered at exactly 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when she walked into her father's study to find photographs scattered across his mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized herself in James's arms, their faces illuminated by candlelight on the warehouse rooftop. Their love, captured in stolen moments she believed were secret. Richard Sterling sat behind his desk, like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence, his steel-gray eyes cold as winter frost. "Sit down, Amanda." His voice carried the kind of authority that had built empires and destroyed rivals, but had never before been directed at her with such lethal precision. "Daddy, I can explain," she began, but he raised his hand, silencing her with a gesture that made her blood run cold. James Rodriguez, 22 years old, works at Martinez Auto Repair, lives in a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. Richard's voice was clinical as he recited facts like a prosecutor building a case. No college education, no family money, no prospects beyond getting his hands dirty for minimum wage. Each word felt like a physical blow, but what terrified Amanda most was the calm way her father delivered them, as if James were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. "He's a good man," Amanda said, finding her voice despite the fear clawing at her throat. "He's kind and honest, and he loves me for who I am, not what I represent." Richard's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Love? Is that what you call this sordid little affair? This rebellion dressed up in romantic delusions?" "It's not a rebellion," Amanda shot back, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "It's the first real thing I've ever felt in my entire life." "Real?" Richard stood slowly, his imposing frame casting shadows across the room. "Let me show you something real, darling daughter." He pressed a button on his phone, and within moments, his assistant Marcus entered carrying a thick folder. Richard opened it with deliberate care, revealing documents that made Amanda's blood turn to ice. James Rodriguez owes $37,000 in medical bills from his mother's cancer treatment, Richard began, his voice matter-of-fact as he destroyed her world piece by piece. The hospital is threatening foreclosure on their family home. His younger sister Maria needs surgery for a heart condition that costs more than he makes in 2 years. Amanda's hands trembled as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know everything about people who get close to my family," Richard continued ruthlessly. "And now that I know his pressure points, removing him from your life becomes remarkably simple." "What are you saying?" But even as she asked the question, Amanda knew the answer, and it made her soul scream in anguish. Richard leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers with the intensity of a predator toying with wounded prey. "I'm saying that one phone call from me ensures James Rodriguez never works in the city again. Every garage, every shop, every business that might hire him will know he's persona non grata. His mother's medical bills will multiply. His sister's surgery will become impossible, and his family will lose everything they have left." "You wouldn't," Amanda whispered, but the certainty in her father's eyes told her he absolutely would. "Or," Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken, "he can disappear from your life voluntarily, and I'll anonymously pay for his mother's treatment and his sister's surgery. $250,000, Amanda, more money than he could earn in a lifetime of honest work." The cruelty of the choice stole her breath. Save James's family by losing him forever, or keep him and watch his loved one suffer for her selfishness. "You're a monster," she said, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of her father's manipulation became clear. "I'm a businessman protecting his assets," Richard replied without a flicker of remorse. "And you, my dear daughter, are my most valuable asset. I won't let you throw your future away on a mechanic who can't even afford to keep his own family healthy." Amanda stood on shaking legs, her whole body trembling with rage and heartbreak. "And if I refuse to give him up? If I choose love over your blood money?" Richard's smile was cold as death. "Then you'll watch the man you claim to love lose everything that matters to him, knowing you could have saved his family with one simple sacrifice. Tell me, Amanda, how long do you think your precious love will last when he discovers your father's wealth could have saved his mother's life, but you chose to keep your romantic fantasy instead?" The words hit their target with surgical precision, because Amanda knew James well enough to understand exactly how that revelation would destroy him. He would blame himself for not being able to provide for his family, and he would hate her for having the power to help but choosing not to use it. "How long do I have?" Her voice was barely a whisper, defeat seeping into her bones like poison. He's being presented with the offer this afternoon. You have until tomorrow morning to make your choice clear to him. Richard returned to his papers, as if this conversation were merely another business transaction. Choose wisely, Amanda. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Amanda left her father's office feeling like she was walking through a nightmare, her mind racing through impossible scenarios and finding no escape from the trap that had been laid with surgical precision. Her father had studied them, learned their weaknesses, and crafted a situation where love itself became the weapon that would destroy them. She drove through the city in a daze, ending up at the warehouse rooftop where she and James had pledged forever just days before. The candles were gone, the blanket was gone, but she could still feel the ghost's touch on her skin, still hear his voice promising they would find a way to make forever happen. Her phone buzzed with text from James. Need to see you tonight. Something important to discuss. Amanda stared at the message through tears, knowing that when she saw him tonight, it would be to say goodbye, not because she loved him any less, but because she loved him too much to let her selfishness destroy his family. She typed back with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. Meet me at the rooftop, 8 o'clock. As the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in shades of endings, Amanda Sterling prepared to sacrifice the only real love she'd ever known on the altar of her father's empire. She would play the dutiful daughter one final time, not for her father's approval, but to save the man she loved from a choice that would haunt him forever. The golden cage was closing around her once again, but this time she was walking into it willingly, trading her freedom for James's family survival. It was the most loving thing she could do, and it was going to destroy them both. Tonight, she would lie to the man who had taught her what truth felt like. Tomorrow, she would return to being Richard Sterling's perfect daughter, carrying the secret of her sacrifice like a scar across her heart for the rest of her life. But for a few more hours, she could pretend that love was enough to conquer empires and that fairy tales could come true, even in a world where money was the only language that truly mattered. The rooftop felt like a graveyard when Amanda arrived at 7:55, 5 minutes early for what she knew would be the last conversation she'd ever had with James Rodriguez. The city sparkled beneath them like scattered diamonds, but all she could see were the ashes of their dreams scattered across the concrete, where they'd once promised each other forever. James emerged from the stairwell at exactly 8 o'clock, and Amanda's heart shattered all over again at the sight of him. He moved with that easy confidence she'd fallen in love with, his dark hair catching the moonlight, his eyes searching for her in the shadows with the hunger of a man who'd spent all day thinking about the woman he loved. "Hey, beautiful," he said softly, crossing to her with that devastating smile that made her knees weak. "I've been going crazy all day, wanting to see you." Amanda forced herself to smile back, even though it felt like swallowing razor blades. "James, we need to talk." Something in her tone must have warned him, because his expression shifted, the easy confidence replaced by wariness. "That sounds ominous. Should I be worried?" "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the spot where they'd made love under the stars just nights before. Now it felt like a crime scene, the place where their happiness had died. James sat, patting the space beside him, but Amanda remained standing. If she got too close, if she let herself touch him one more time, she'd never find the strength to do what needed to be done. "Amanda, you're scaring me," he said quietly. "What's going on?" She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times during the drive over, but now that she was here, looking into his eyes that held so much love and trust, the words stuck in her throat like thorns. "I can't do this anymore," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. James went completely still. "Can't do it anymore?" Us, sneaking around, lying to everyone, pretending we can make this work when we both know it's impossible. Each word was like a knife to her own heart, but she forced herself to continue. "We're from different worlds. James, I was kidding myself thinking we could bridge that gap." "Amanda, what are you talking about?" James stood abruptly, reaching for her, but she stepped back. His hand fell to his side like a wounded bird. "Just yesterday you were talking about our future, about finding a way to be together. What changed?" "Everything," she wanted to scream. "Your family's lives hang in the balance, and I'm the only one who can save them. Instead, she lifted her chin and delivered the killing blow with as much conviction as she could muster. I realized I was being naive. Romantic fantasies are fine for summer flings, but real life is different. I have responsibilities, a future that was planned long before I met you. Her voice grew stronger as she fell into the role her father had written for her. I'm 18 years old, James. I got caught up in the excitement of rebellion, but it's time to grow up. You don't mean that. His voice was raw with pain and disbelief. Amanda, look at me. You don't mean any of this. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to let him see the cold mask she'd learned to wear in her father's world. I do mean it. What we had was fun, but it was never real. It was never going to last. Fun. James repeated the word like it was poison in his mouth. You call what we have fun? What else would you call it? Amanda wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her soul together. A summer romance between a rich girl and a mechanic? It's a cliche, James. I should have known better. She watched something die in his eyes, watched the man who'd looked at her like she was his entire universe begin to withdraw behind walls of hurt and pride. So that's it. His voice was steady now, controlled, and somehow that was worse than if he'd yelled at her. You're just done? Moving on to more suitable prospects. The accusation hit its mark, and Amanda let it, because his anger would make this easier for both of them. William Henderson is a good match. He understands my world, my responsibilities. He can give me the life I'm supposed to have. The life you're supposed to have, James repeated slowly. And what about the life you want to have? What about everything you told me about feeling trapped, about wanting to make your own choices? I was being dramatic, Amanda said, each like carving away another piece of her soul. Sometimes we have to accept that our first choices aren't always the right ones. James stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him processing her words, trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the one who'd whispered she loved him just nights before. You know what's funny? He said finally, his voice quiet and broken. I actually thought you were different. I thought you were real in a way that no one else in your world could ever be. I thought you loved me enough to fight for what we have. James, she began, but he held up his hand. No, let me finish. I need to say this. He stepped closer, and she could see the pain written across his face like scars. I fell in love with a woman who said she was tired of living other people's expectations. A woman who wanted to choose her own path, make her own decisions. But I guess that woman was just playing a part, wasn't she? Just slumming it with the help for a few weeks before going back to her real life. That's not. Amanda's voice broke, but she caught herself before she could take it back. She had to let him believe the worst of her. It was the only way to set him free. You know what hurts the most? James continued, his eyes never leaving her face. It's not that you're choosing money over love. It's that you're lying to me about why. We promised each other honesty. Amanda, we promised no games, no pretense. But you're standing there feeding me lines like I'm too stupid to see through them. Amanda's composure cracked, just for a moment. James, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? His laugh was harsh and bitter. You're ripping my heart out. Amanda, how much harder could it possibly get? She wanted to tell him everything. Wanted to explain about the photographs, the ultimatum, the impossible choice between his love and his family's survival. But she couldn't. If James knew the truth, he'd try to fight her father, and Richard Sterling would destroy him completely. I'm sorry, she whispered, the only honest word she'd spoken all night. I'm so sorry, James. Yeah, he said quietly, backing toward the stairwell. Me too. I'm sorry I thought you were brave enough to love someone like me. I'm sorry I believed you when you said none of the rest of it mattered. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her one last time. You know what the really tragic part is? I would have waited for you. However long it took, whatever obstacles we faced, I would have found a way to be worthy of the Sterling Princess. But it turns out the Sterling Princess was never worthy of love in the first place. The words hit her like physical blows, and Amanda wrapped her arms around herself to keep from falling apart completely. She watched the man she loved disappear down the stairs, taking her heart with him, and leaving her alone with the wreckage of their dreams. She stayed on that rooftop until dawn, crying until she had no tears left, mourning not just the loss of James, but the death of the woman she'd been when she was with him. That woman who'd been brave enough to climb fire escapes and sneak out of golden cages, who believed love could conquer any obstacle, was gone forever. Tomorrow, she would return to being Richard Sterling's perfect daughter. She would smile at William Henderson and plan charity galas, and live the life that had been mapped out for her before she was born. She would carry the secret of her sacrifice like a wound that would never heal, knowing that somewhere in the city, the man she loved was safe and whole because she'd been strong enough to let him go. As the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of endings and new beginnings, Amanda Sterling walked away from love and back toward the golden cage that would be her prison for the rest of her life. But for the first time, she entered it not as a victim, but as a woman who'd made an impossible choice for all the right reasons. It was the most selfless thing she'd ever done, and it was going to haunt her forever. 7 years had passed since that devastating night on the rooftop, but Amanda Sterling could still feel the ghost of James's touch on her skin whenever the wind caught her hair just right. She stood in the marble foyer of the Sterling Foundation headquarters, adjusting her tailored Armani suit and preparing for another day of playing the role that had become her prison. At 25, Amanda had evolved into everything her father had always wanted her to be. She was a perfect society princess, the Sterling Empire's most valuable asset, and a reluctant fiancée of William Henderson III. Her engagement ring caught the morning light as she smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. 3 carats of perfectly cut diamonds that felt like shackles around her finger. "Good morning, Miss Sterling." Her assistant Marcus greeted her with his usual professional deference. "Your 10 o'clock with the Henderson wedding planner has been moved to 11. Something about cake tastings and flower arrangements." Amanda nodded, her smile never wavering even as her soul died a little more. Wedding planning. The final nail in the coffin of the woman she used to be, the woman who had once believed love could conquer empires. "Also," Marcus continued, consulting his tablet, "there's been a change in the contractor for the youth center renovation project. The original firm had some kind of financial difficulties, so we're bringing in Rodriguez Construction. They come highly recommended and have an excellent reputation for community projects." The name hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment, Amanda couldn't breathe. Rodriguez. It couldn't be him. Could it? "Rodriguez Construction?" she managed to ask, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, they've been making quite a name for themselves over the past few years. The owner started small but has built up an impressive portfolio of work in underserved communities, very much in line with the foundation's mission." Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed this information. 7 years. 7 years of carefully constructed walls, of buried feelings, of pretending she didn't think about James Rodriguez every single day. And now his name was being spoken in her boardroom like he was just another contractor, another business transaction. "I'll need to review their portfolio before we make any final decisions," she said, amazed at how calm she sounded when everything inside her was screaming. "Of course. I'll have everything sent to your office within the hour." Amanda made it to her corner office before her composure finally cracked. She sank into her leather chair, her hands shaking as she stared out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, James was building a life, creating a business, becoming the man she'd always known he could be. And she was trapped in a glass tower, planning a wedding to a man she could barely tolerate, living a life that felt like slow suffocation. When the portfolio arrived, Amanda's breath caught at the first photograph. There he was, in a hard hat and work boots, standing proudly in front of a completed community center. 7 years had been kind to James Rodriguez. His shoulders were broader, his face more mature, marked by success and determination. But those dark eyes were the same, intense, passionate, alive in ways that made her remember what it felt like to truly live. The project showcase in his portfolio told a story of a man who had found his purpose. Community centers in low-income neighborhoods, affordable housing developments, a youth shelter that looked like hope made concrete and steel. Every building bore the mark of someone who understood struggle, who wanted to lift others up the way she had once lifted him. Amanda's finger traced a photograph of James without conscious thought, her heart aching with a mixture of pride and devastating loss. He had become everything she'd seen in him during those stolen summer nights. Successful, respected, making a difference in the world. And she had become everything she'd once rebelled against, cold, calculating, trapped in golden chains. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "Darling, Mother wants to discuss the rehearsal dinner menu. Can you meet us at the club at 3? Amanda stared at the message, feeling the familiar wave of nausea that came with thinking about her impending marriage. William Henderson III was handsome in a way that breeding and money could manufacture. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He was also boring, self-absorbed, and had wandering hands that made her skin crawl. But he was safe, approved, the kind of husband who would never challenge her father's empire or threaten the carefully constructed world of appearances and acquisitions. The kind of man who would never make her feel the dangerous, intoxicating rush of genuine passion. Another text arrived, this one from her maid of honor and supposed best friend, Chloe. "Can't wait for the bachelorette party next weekend. Vegas is going to be amazing. Time to give you one last taste of freedom before you become Mrs. Henderson." Freedom. The word tasted bitter in Amanda's mind. She'd traded her freedom 7 years ago on a rooftop, sacrificing love for duty, passion for security. And every day since, she'd told herself it had been worth it, that saving James's family had justified the death of her dreams. But looking at his photograph now, seeing the man he'd become, Amanda wondered for the first time if she'd made the wrong choice. What if they could have found another way? What if love really could have conquered the obstacles in their path? She closed the portfolio with shaking hands, but she couldn't close her heart to the flood of memories that came rushing back. James's laugh when she told him silly jokes. The way he looked at her, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The gentle strength of his hands when he held her face and promised they would find a way to make forever happen. "Miss Sterling." Marcus's voice came through the intercom, startling her back to present. "Mr. Rodriguez from Rodriguez Construction is here for the preliminary meeting. Should I send him in?" Amanda's world tilted on its axis. He was here, in her building, probably riding up in the elevator at this very moment. 7 years of careful distance, of buried emotions, of pretending she'd moved on, were about to collide with reality in the most devastating way possible. "Miss Sterling," Marcus repeated. "Should I?" "Yes," Amanda whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again with more strength. "Yes, send him in." She had 30 seconds to compose herself, to build the walls back up, to become the cold, sterling princess who could handle any business meeting with professional detachment. 30 seconds to prepare for seeing the only man she'd ever loved, knowing she was engaged to marry someone else in 6 weeks. The door opened, and Marcus stepped aside to let James Rodriguez walk into her life once again. He was even more devastating in person than in the photographs. Taller than she remembered, his shoulders filling out his dark suit in ways that made her mouth go dry. Success looked good on him, gave him a confidence that was purely masculine and utterly magnetic. But when their eyes met across the polished expanse of her office, Amanda saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, surprise, and then something harder that made her heart clench with regret. "Hello, Amanda," he said quietly, his voice deeper than she remembered, but carrying the same gravelly honey that had once made her forget her own name. "Mr. Rodriguez," she replied, falling back on formality like armor. "Welcome to the Sterling Foundation." They stared at each other across 7 years of hurt and misunderstandings, across the chasm of different worlds and impossible choices. And Amanda realized that some bridges, once burned, left scars that never fully healed, but the foundations were still there, waiting to see if they were strong enough to support the weight of a second chance. The tension in Amanda's office was so thick you could cut it with a knife. James stood just inside the doorway, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her transformed appearance. The perfectly styled hair, the designer suit, the engagement ring that caught the light like a beacon of everything that stood between them. "Please have a seat," Amanda managed, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. Professional distance. That was the key to surviving this encounter without completely falling apart. James moved with that same easy confidence she remembered, but there was something different now, A harder edge, a wariness that spoke of lessons learned the painful way. He sat down and opened his leather portfolio, every movement controlled and businesslike. I have to admit, I was surprised to see the Sterling Foundation on my client list, he said, his voice carefully neutral. 7 years is a long time, Amanda. Miss Sterling, she corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it when she saw his jaw tighten. Of course, Miss Sterling. The way he said her name was like ice, nothing like the way he used to whisper it against her skin in moments of passion. I understand you're interested in our services for a youth center renovation. Amanda forced herself to focus on the business at hand, pulling up the project files on her computer. The Morrison Youth Center on 5th Street. It's been neglected for years, and the foundation has finally allocated funds for a complete overhaul. Morrison Youth Center, James repeated, and something shifted in his expression. That's in my old neighborhood. Yes, I know. The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing that she remembered far more about his life than she should after all these years. Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment, the professional mask slipped. Amanda saw the boy who used to dream of building something meaningful, and James saw the girl who used to listen to those dreams like they were the most important things in the world. The current structure is sound, James said, clearing his throat and returning to business. But it needs complete electrical and plumbing overhauls, new HVAC, updated safety systems. It's a big project. Can you handle something of this scope? Amanda asked, genuinely curious about what he'd built in the years since she destroyed them both. Rodriguez Construction has completed 12 similar projects in the past 3 years. James replied with quiet pride. We specialize in community renovations, bringing hope back to neighborhoods that have been forgotten by everyone else. The passion in his voice when he talked about his work was unmistakable, and Amanda felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she used to get when he talked about his dreams during those long summer nights. I'd like to schedule a site visit, she said impulsively, to assess the project firsthand. James raised an eyebrow. Don't you have people for that? I can't imagine Amanda Sterling getting her designer shoes dirty walking through a rundown youth center. The barb hit its mark, but Amanda lifted her chin defiantly. You might be surprised by what I'm willing to do, Mr. Rodriguez. Yeah, he said quietly, his eyes boring into hers. I used to think that too. The words hung between them like an accusation, carrying all the weight of their shared history. Amanda felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack under the intensity of his gaze. Before she could respond, her phone rang with a distinctive tone she'd assigned to her father. Richard Sterling never called during business hours unless something was wrong. Excuse me, she said to James, then answered the phone. Daddy? Amanda, I need you to come to the hospital immediately. Her father's voice was strained in a way she'd never heard before. There's been an accident. Amanda's blood turned to ice. What kind of accident? Are you hurt? Not me. William. He was in a car crash about an hour ago. He's in surgery, and it doesn't look good. The world seemed to tilt around Amanda as the implications crashed over her. William, her fiancé, the man she was supposed to marry in 6 weeks, was fighting for his life in a hospital operating room. I'll be right there, she said, already reaching for her purse. Amanda, wait. Her father's voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. There's something else. The police are investigating the crash. They think his brakes were tampered with. Tampered with. Amanda's voice came out as a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying someone wanted William Henderson dead, and we need to figure out why before they decide to target you next. Amanda's hand trembled as she ended the call. Attempted murder. Her fiancé was in surgery because someone had tried to kill him, and if her father was right, she could be next. Amanda? James's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. She looked at him sitting across from her desk, this man she'd loved and lost and tried so hard to forget. The man who knew her better than anyone else in the world, who had once promised to protect her from anything that tried to hurt her. William's been in an accident, she said numbly. Someone tried to kill him. James was on his feet instantly, his business facade cracking to reveal genuine concern. Are you safe? Do you need protection? I don't know, Amanda admitted, her voice breaking as the full reality hit her. I don't know anything anymore. Where do you need to go? James asked, already moving toward her. The hospital. I need to get to the hospital. I'll drive you, he said without hesitation. James, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. Whatever happened between us, I'm not going to let you face this alone. Amanda looked into his eyes and saw the same protective instinct that had once made her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life. 7 years of hurt and misunderstandings seemed to melt away in the face of genuine crisis. Thank you, she whispered. As they left her office together, Amanda realized that fate had just thrown them back into each other's lives in the most dramatic way possible. Someone wanted her fiancé dead, which meant her carefully ordered world was about to explode into chaos. And the only person she trusted to help her navigate that chaos was the man whose heart she'd broken 7 years ago. In the elevator riding down to the garage, James stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the solid strength of his presence. It was like being wrapped in memories of safety and love, and the kind of protection that came not from money or power, but from someone who truly cared whether you lived or died. Amanda, he said quietly as the elevator descended, I need you to know something. What? Whatever happened between us, whatever you did or didn't feel back then, I would never let anyone hurt you. Never. The simple declaration hit her harder than any of his earlier barbs. This was the James she remembered. The man who had fought dragons for her, who had looked at an 18-year-old spoiled princess and seen someone worth protecting. As they reached the parking garage, Amanda realized that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. Someone wanted her fiancé dead. Her father was scared for the first time in her memory. And the only man she'd ever loved was back in her life just when she needed him most. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of timing. But as James held the car door open for her with old-fashioned courtesy, Amanda couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally giving them a second chance at the love they'd been forced to abandon. The question was whether they were both brave enough to take it. The hospital waiting room felt like purgatory, all sterile white walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to make bad news feel even worse. Amanda sat rigidly upright, her designer suit wrinkled for the first time in years, while James paced like a caged panther near the windows overlooking the city. 3 hours had passed since William Henderson had been wheeled into surgery, and still no word from the doctors. Richard Sterling held court in the corner, his phone pressed his ear as he barked orders at private investigators and security teams. Amanda had never seen her father look so rattled, so genuinely afraid. The brake lines were definitely cut, Detective Martinez was saying to Richard, her voice low but not low enough to escape Amanda's hearing. This was professional work. Whoever did this knew exactly how to make it look like an accident. Amanda closed her eyes, trying to process the reality that someone wanted her fiancé dead. The rational part of her mind knew she should be devastated, terrified for the man she was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. Instead, all she could think about was how empty she felt, how the thought of losing William inspired nothing but a vague sense of obligation. Amanda, James's voice was soft as he approached her chair. You need to eat something. You haven't had anything since this morning. She looked up at him, this man who had once known her better than she knew herself, and felt something crack inside her chest. I'm not hungry. When's the last time you slept? Really slept? His dark eyes searched her face with the same intensity she remembered from 7 years ago. You look exhausted. I'm fine, she lied, but her voice betrayed her by cracking on the words. James sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. No, you're not, and that's okay. You don't have to be strong for everyone all the time. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. Amanda had spent 7 years being Richard Sterling's perfect daughter, William Henderson's suitable fiancée, the Sterling Foundation's untouchable ice queen. No one had looked at her with genuine concern in so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as simply human. James, she whispered, her composure finally beginning to crumble. I'm scared. I know, he said quietly, But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise. Before Amanda could respond, her father appeared beside them, his face grim with new information. Amanda, we need to talk. Privately. James started to stand, but Amanda caught his arm. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of James. He's staying with me. Richard's steel-gray eyes flicked between them, taking in a protective way James had positioned himself and the death grip Amanda had on his arm. Fine. The police had discovered something disturbing. William's accident wasn't random. Someone's been watching both of you for weeks. Amanda's blood turned to ice. What do you mean, watching us? Security footage from outside your apartment, the country club, even the Sterling Foundation building. Someone's been tracking your movements, learning your routines. Richard's voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. The working theory is that you were the real target, and William was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Me! Amanda's voice came out as a whisper. Why would someone want to kill me? That's what we're trying to figure out, Richard said grimly. But until we do, you're not safe. I'm assigning a full security detail, and you're moving back into the penthouse where we can protect you properly. No. The word escaped Amanda's lips before she could think about it. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? I said no. Amanda stood, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. I'm not going to hide in your tower like a princess in a fairy tale. I have a life, responsibilities. Amanda, someone tried to kill you today, Richard said, his voice rising. This isn't the time for teenage rebellion. I'm 25 years old, Daddy. I stopped being a teenager a long time ago. Amanda lifted her chin defiantly. And I'm not running away from this. Then what do you suggest? Richard's tone carried the barely controlled fury of a man and used to being challenged. I suggest we find out who's behind this and stop them, Amanda said, then looked at James. And I want James to handle my security. Absolutely not, Richard snapped. I have professionals for this. People trained in executive protection. People who work for you, Amanda shot back. People whose loyalty is to the Sterling Empire, not to me. I trust James with my life. James looked between father and daughter, clearly recognizing the deeper battle being fought beneath the surface of this argument. Amanda, I don't think. Do you still care about me? She asked him directly, her emerald eyes boring into his. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 7 years of hurt and longing and unfinished business. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read the secrets written there. You know I do, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Then help me, Amanda said simply. Help me find out who's trying to destroy my life, and help me stop them. Richard Sterling looked like he'd swallowed something particularly unpleasant. This is insanity. Amanda, you're putting your life in the hands of... Of what? Amanda's voice turned dangerous. Of someone from the wrong side of the tracks? Someone who isn't good enough for your precious daughter. The accusation hit its mark, and Richard's face flushed with anger. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Do I? Amanda stepped closer to her father, years of resentment finally boiling over. Because it sounds exactly like the same prejudice you used to tear us apart 7 years ago. James went very still beside her, and Amanda realized she revealed more than she'd intended. But she was done hiding, done pretending that the past didn't matter. 7 years ago, I made a choice, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I chose duty over love, obligation over happiness. I let you convince me that James wasn't worthy of the Sterling name. But you know what I learned? Money can't buy courage. Power can't purchase loyalty. And all the social status in the world means nothing if you're too much of a coward to fight for what you really want. Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously. Careful, Amanda, you're walking on thin ice. Good, she said, surprising them all with her vehemence. I've been playing it safe my whole life, and where has it gotten me? Engaged to a man I don't love, living a life that feels like a beautiful prison, surrounded by people who care more about my trust fund than my happiness. She turned to James, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to risk everything one more time. I love you, James Rodriguez. I never stopped loving you. 7 years ago, I broke both our hearts because I thought I was protecting you from my father's wrath. But I was wrong. I was a coward who chose the easy path instead of fighting for what mattered most. James stared at her, his dark eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Amanda, I know I don't deserve another chance. She rushed on before she could lose her nerve. I know I hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable. But someone is trying to kill me, James, and if I'm going to die, I want to die knowing that I finally told you the truth. I want to die knowing that I was brave enough to fight for love at least once in my life. The waiting room had gone completely silent around them, Richard Sterling's face cycling through shock, rage, and something that might have been grudging respect. James took a step closer to Amanda, his hands reaching up to frame her face with the same gentle reverence she remembered from 7 years ago. You want to know the truth? He said quietly, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I never got over you either. 7 years of trying to hate you, trying to convince myself that what we had wasn't real, and I never got over you. Amanda felt tears streaming down her face as 7 years of buried pain finally found release. Can you forgive me? Can we try again? There's nothing to forgive, James said, leaning his forehead against hers. You were 18 years old, caught between impossible choices. I should have fought harder for you. Should have found a way to prove I was worthy of your love. You were always worthy, Amanda whispered. I was just too scared to see it. Richard Sterling cleared his throat, breaking the spell that had fallen over them. While this reconciliation is touching, we still have the small matter of someone trying to murder my daughter. Amanda and James broke apart, but their hands remained intertwined, 7 years of separation finally bridged by truth and courage. You're right, James said, his voice taking on a harder edge as he shifted into protective mode. Which is why I'm going to find whoever did this and make sure they never threaten Amanda again. We're going to find them, Amanda corrected. Together. No more running, no more hiding. It's time to fight for forever. The penthouse felt different at midnight. Shadows dancing across the marble floors as Amanda stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city sparkle beneath her like scattered diamonds. 3 days had passed since the hospital confrontation that had changed everything, and tonight, they finally had answers. The security footage from a parking garage came back clean. Detective Martinez announced to the assembled group in Richard Sterling's study. We got a clear shot of the suspect planting the device on Henderson's car. Amanda's breath caught as she looked at the photograph. Margaret Ashworth, William's own mother, stared back at her from the black and white security image. Her face twisted with hatred as she crouched beside her son's BMW. His own mother tried to kill him? Amanda whispered, unable to process the betrayal. Not kill him. Detective Martinez corrected grimly. Kill you. According to the phone records we recovered, Mrs. Ashworth has been in contact with a private investigator for months, tracking your movements, learning your schedule. She knew you and William always rode together to the country club on Fridays. Richard Sterling's face was stone-cold fury. But why? What possible reason could she have? The detective consulted her notes. Family finances. Turns out the Ashworth fortune isn't as solid as everyone believed. They've been leveraging everything on high-risk investments, and they're months away from bankruptcy. The marriage contract between William and Amanda would secure their financial future through the Sterling dowry. But I was marrying William, Amanda said, confusion clear in her voice. The marriage would have saved them anyway. Not according to the contract your father's lawyers drafted, Detective Martinez explained. If either party dies before the wedding, the financial agreements become null and void. But if you had died after marriage, William would have inherited everything, including your trust fund. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She was going to kill me after the wedding. Amanda breathed. Let William grieve for an appropriate period. Then they would have had access to the Sterling fortune. The plan was actually more sophisticated than that, the detective continued. Mrs. Ashworth had been slowly poisoning William with small doses of digitalis for weeks. Nothing fatal, just enough to make him sick, dependent, grateful for his mother's care. After your death, she planned to increase the doses until his heart gave out, making it look like grief had killed him. Amanda felt her knees go weak, but James was there instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist to keep her upright. The solid warmth of his body against hers was the only thing keeping her anchored as the full scope of the Ashworth betrayal sank in. She would have murdered her own son, Amanda whispered in horror. For $50 million, she was willing to murder everyone, Detective Martinez confirmed. We found detailed plans in her apartment. Your accident was meant to be just the beginning. Richard Sterling stood abruptly, his face darker than Amanda had ever seen it. Where is she now? In custody. She'll be charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and about 6 other felonies. She's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the detective gathered her files and prepared to leave, Richard turned to face his daughter and the man who held her heart. The past 3 days had been a revelation for the Sterling patriarch, watching James Rodriguez protect Amanda with a fierce devotion that money couldn't buy. I owe you an apology, Richard said quietly to James, the words clearly difficult for a man and used to admitting he was wrong. 7 years ago, I judged you by your bank account instead of your character. I was wrong. James nodded acknowledgement, but didn't release his protective hold on Amanda. You were protecting your daughter the only way you knew how. I can't fault a father for that. Can't you? Richard's laugh was bitter. I nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to her because I was too proud and too scared to believe that love could be more powerful than money. Amanda pulled away from James just enough to look at her father with new eyes. Daddy, what are you saying? I'm saying that watching you these past 3 days, seeing the woman you become when you're with him, has taught me something I should have learned long ago. Richard's steel-gray eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. Money can buy security, Amanda, but it can't buy courage. It can't buy loyalty. And it sure as hell can't buy the kind of love that makes a man willing to die to protect you. Tears streamed down Amanda's face as she heard the words she'd waited her whole life for her father to say. James Rodriguez, Richard continued, turning to face the man who'd won his daughter's heart twice. I formally withdraw my objections to your relationship with Amanda. If she'll have you, you have my blessing to marry my daughter. Amanda's heart stopped beating for a moment as she turned to look at James, hope and fear warring in her chest. They declared their love, but marriage? Forever? After everything they'd been through? James took her hands in his dark eyes intense with the same passion she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Amanda Sterling, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't have a ring, and this isn't the romantic proposal you deserve, but I can't wait another second to ask you this question. He dropped to one knee right there in her father's study, and Amanda's world tilted on its axis. I've loved you since the moment you walked into my garage pretending to be lost, James continued, his voice gaining strength. I loved you through 7 years of thinking I wasn't good enough, 7 years of trying to forget you, 7 years of comparing every woman I met to the girl who stole my heart and never gave it back. Amanda was sobbing openly now, her hands trembling in his. I can't promise you a life without challenges, James went on. I can't promise you the kind of luxury you've always known, but I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you. I will fight for you. I will love you with everything I have and everything I am. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, revealing a simple but stunning diamond solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire. Amanda Sterling, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me based on love instead of duty, passion instead of obligation, truth instead of pretense? Through her tears, Amanda saw not just a successful businessman James had become, but the dreamer who'd promised to show her what real love felt like. She saw their future stretched out before them, building community centers together, raising children who would know they were loved for who they were rather than what they represented, growing old together with hearts still young and fierce with devotion. Yes, she whispered, then said it louder, stronger. Yes, James Rodriguez, I will marry you. I will build a life with you. I will love you until my heart stops beating and beyond. James slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been meant for her all along. Then he stood and kissed her with all the passion of 7 years of separation, 7 years of longing, 7 years of love that had refused to die despite every obstacle thrown in its path. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing through their tears. Richard Sterling was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time Amanda could remember. "So," her father said with dry humor, "I suppose this means I need to cancel the Henderson wedding and plan a Rodriguez wedding instead." "Actually," Amanda said, surprising them both, "I'd like something simple. A small ceremony, just family and friends. I've spent enough of my life on display. I want our wedding to be about love, not spectacle." James grinned, the expression transforming his face into beautiful, open joy she remembered from their stolen summer nights. "I love this woman," he announced to the room. "God help me, but I love her stubborn independence, her fierce heart, and her ability to surprise me every single day." "Good," Richard said firmly, because she's going to need a man strong enough to match her spirit and patient enough to handle her sterling temper. As the three of them laughed together, Amanda realized that some stories do get happy endings, but only after characters are brave enough to fight for them. She'd spent 7 years in a golden cage, but she finally learned that the key to freedom had been in her heart all along. The courage to choose love over fear, passion over security, truth over comfortable lies. 6 months later, Amanda Rodriguez stood in the garden of the youth center James had renovated, surrounded by the children and families they served together, exchanging vows with the man who taught her that real love was about being worthy. It was about being willing to risk everything for someone whose happiness mattered more than your own. And as James kissed his bride beneath a canopy of stars, Amanda knew that some bridges, once rebuilt on foundations of truth and forgiveness, could support the weight of forever after all.